formed a line between the protesters and the recruiters' booth and ordered the protesters to disperse. And their grounds for getting the protesters to disperse was a Chicago ordinance that said if a cop tells you to disperse, you have to disperse under the circumstances where 3 or more persons are committing acts of disorderly conduct in the immediate vicinity. Well, I guess an ordinance like that kind of makes sense. You know, if you have 3 people over here rioting and I'm standing around near the riot, I guess it kind of makes sense to tell the non-rioters that they have to leave so that they're not going to get in the way when you break up the riot or these other 3 people over here engaging in disorderly conduct. So that's what the ordinance is for. Well, here the protesters refused to disperse, and they were charged with violating this for not dispersing when they were told to in circumstances where 3 or more persons were committing acts of disorderly conduct. Now, one slight problem here was nobody was engaging in disorderly conduct. You know, these recruiters, they'd seen it all a million times before. They're not going to start getting disorderly. And there was no evidence that anybody else was getting disorderly. So the fact, one of the elements of this offense was there have to be 3 other people being disorderly. Here there were no other people being disorderly. The defendants in the criminal case, who later became the plaintiffs here, went to court. In the state court, the judge kind of saw through it. The prosecutor asked, well, can we have a continuance? And that's how the judge said, no, you're not going to be able to prove your case. So the judge just dismissed the case, and there were no charges against them. Well, the plaintiffs, I guess emboldened by that victory, decided to go to the U.S. District Court and get an injunction against any further enforcement by the city of Chicago of this ordinance. And on First Amendment grounds, because really what this ordinance is kind of like a heckler's veto. So, for example, if I come in here and give a speech, and the 3 of you don't like what I have to say, you can start engaging in disorderly conduct and, you know, throwing tomatoes at me or whatever. It's not my fault that you're throwing the tomatoes, so whether or not that's disorderly, you should not have the right to shut down my speech. If I'm acting perfectly peaceably, you should not have the ability to have a veto and put my speech to an end just because you decide to act in a disorderly fashion. Well, that's kind of what this ordinance does. The police can tell you under this ordinance, if I come in here, I'm giving a speech, and people start throwing tomatoes at me, the police can tell me to leave. It doesn't say that they have to arrest you. I suppose they could, but they don't have to. They can tell me to leave, and I can get arrested for doing nothing other than coming in and giving a speech. So that can give rise to a heckler's veto. And earlier Supreme Court cases make clear that there cannot be a heckler's veto, that hecklers should not be allowed to dictate what kind of speech I give. And that's kind of what happened here, except that there weren't any hecklers. But the city used an ordinance saying if there were hecklers. Well, the district court in Illinois granted the injunction, but the city appealed. And the Court of Appeals reversed. Not because they said that that would be a proper heckler's veto, but because the plaintiffs in this case lacked standing. Because they were not prosecuted under the statute. There was no heckler's veto here. They were prosecuted with violating the statute, but there was absolutely no grounds for that. I think the court used the word specious to describe the prosecution in the state court. Therefore, they lacked standing. The court said, such a clear misuse of the law, so there's a misuse of this law, does not provide a basis for a federal court to explore that law's facial constitutionality. So if these people had been convicted or threatened with conviction for violating it, if they actually had incited this disorderly conduct by other people, then yeah, they probably would have had standing. But here, they simply lacked standing. There was no case or controversy because this statute had not been enforced against them. The city purported to enforce it, but it was quickly dismissed when it was found that there was no factual basis for it. So they lack standing.